Hi guys. So I wanted to paint a white flower, flowers from a reference photo that I have taken as I've been walking down this trail near my house, and this bush is a spring blooming flower. So I've been snapping pictures of it. It's about past bloom now, but it's called a snowball bush. Viburnum is the species that blooms in the spring. I think I'm saying that right. But I have my picture here that I really like because of the lighting. I love the backlit, the way this backlighting kind of makes those flowers pop out against the green. So, and I like this little ray of light that's coming down too. So that's one of the things that drew me to this picture. Then I took this one, more of the front view of those. I think it was the same. There was a bunch of them over there, but I like the composition of this with the multiple flowers in it and the way it's drooping. So I flipped it because I like it that way better. And you can do that because you're the artist and the photography and all of that stuff. So I flipped it, and I'm going to be working from this picture to try to figure out my composition, and from this picture to figure out the color, the feeling, and the lighting. So in painting white flowers, in order to make them the star of the show, you have to figure out a way to make them stand out. And part of painting as well, I'm admittedly not very good at the planning part of it, but it's really important to kind of have an idea of what you're going for. So I started writing some notes about what kind of questions should you ask before you're starting a painting. Well, first of all, the subject. What are you drawn to? What stirs your emotions? You don't want to just paint something that doesn't hit a spot in you, making you feel something, you know? So that's, how you choose your subject is, what are you going to love to paint? What size then is the next question. I'm going for this 7 by 10 little Artistico block that I have. It's 100% cotton, extra white, and it's 140 pound, like I said, on a block. So what I've done just before I move on is I put it down here on a bigger sheet of sketch paper and drew a line around it so I could figure my composition out before I actually draw it onto the paper. Don't want to erase on my watercolor paper. It can ruin the surface and leave smudges and all kinds of stuff. So I'd rather work out my composition over here. So what is the feeling I'm going for? The feeling is this backlit afternoon, kind of almost hazy parts of it make me feel like this is a beautiful, warm afternoon. So I'm going for that feeling. And then what brushes am I going to use? I want this to be rather loose and fluid, so I don't want to be trying to paint my picture with a teeny tiny brush. I want to paint with something that's going to allow me to fill in bigger areas initially. And so I'll probably go with my oval wash. This is my oval wash, and it's a 3/4 inch Princeton Neptune. It's probably going to be almost too big, but it's better to be almost too big than to have a brush that you're struggling with because it's too small. So keep that in mind and pick the appropriate brush for your size of painting. And then kind of included in that was, what's the style of painting? I'm going for a more loose background for sure, and probably pretty loose in the snowball blossom. So then I'm going to want to pick a color scheme that is going to portray the feeling that I'm going for. And, because this is, it's in the greens and the yellow greens and the creamy whites, And even though white blossom, we don't necessarily paint it white. There's very few areas that are really stark white. Most of it is kind of that light green, even the shade of that is the same green, but maybe with a little gray added to it somehow. So let me talk about that, because what I chose for this is analogous. I started pretty much with, okay, my main color in this painting is green, in this photo is green. So I love that bright yellow spring green that's going on there. So then I decide which colors I want to go with it. Analogous is having the colors in the same line with each other, so it's not skipping around. It's all in the same row. So I'm going to just read it off of here. Using analogous is using any shades, tints, or tones of colors that lie adjacent to each other on the color wheel. So tint, tone, and shade. Tint is the upper one, tone is the middle one, and shade is the bottom one. A tint is the color plus white. A tone is the color plus gray. A shade is the color plus black. So I've got my yellow-green. This is yellow-green with white, yellow-green with gray, and yellow-green with black. So that's my thinking in this. So we'll see how it plays out. But I do like having the little bit of yellow-orange to add to this color scheme. So put that aside, and then we're going to look at the composition here. I'm going to start just by making some, maybe I'll just make a couple of dots. I want the main flower to be here, and we'll go for the second flower about here that's hanging down, and a little teeny tiny one. Actually, I think I want this one a little bit further in here, and then a little blossom there. So we've got a line kind of going like this. And maybe I'll bring this one even down a little bit, because then I can add another blossom over here. So I've got a kind of a curve going on. Let's bring this one up a little bit more. So now a little swooping action. So then I'm going to just kind of draw some circles around those. I'm not doing anything fancy here. Move that one a little bit down here, a little off center, because I want that one to be, don't want it going off the page necessarily. And then I'll probably put just a little friend next to that one. So we've got I think I want this one to be bigger. Maybe even bigger still. And this one's going to be the secondary. And this is going to be a little guy. And then we've got some branches in here. And if I get my head in the camera, please forgive me. It's really hard not to do that. There's a couple of branches. There's going to be some leaves in here. And I'd like to see a few more branches kind of here and there, just random as I go. I'll probably just do that as I paint. Some leaves up here. stem, or branch, we should say. And then over here, I just want to indicate where I want my light area to be. I might even make this a flower too. As I'm looking at that, I think that would be maybe. And some leaves. So that's kind of the map. Bring that down a little bit further. And we'll have some leaves kind of hanging off. And we'll do that pretty loose. That background's going to be very loose. And so that's kind of what we're going for. So a little bit of maybe even a little bit more over here with this one. Just going for the movement. So we've got a nice flow. Okay, I think I like that, so let's transfer that onto the paper. Okay, so let's talk about how to make these white flowers pop out and be the star of the show. So with the photo that I have that I liked the lighting of, I could turn this black and white just to get a better idea of the values and where the lights are, how the flowers compare in value to the background. But I actually have this little piece of red vellum, I guess it's called, that I can just stick right over the top of my image here. And it really gives me a better idea of where the lights are. And you can see that basically down in the lower part of this flower, the value is pretty close to some of the leaves here. It's a little bit lighter than this really dark back here, but it's still fairly dark. It's not white. The lightest part of it is the upper edge where that sun is hitting. So let me take that off so you can see. So now you can kind of see this value needs to be somewhat close to that. Squint your eyes, shut one eye, and it's easier to see the values. This little area is about the same if you squint your eyes as that leaf. So really important to get the values right. If you get the values right, then your painting is going to have a much better chance of being successful. So what I'm going to start with are leaf green. That's Holbein color. I'm loving how that looks with white added to it. It's a very subtle green and very calming green. And that's another part of this picture. It feels calming. Late afternoon, just very peaceful. And then I've chosen to use some Cobalt green, and that's also a Holbein color, and Horizon Blue, Holbein color, and I've got Neutral Tint, also Holbein, and Titanium White. So for the most part, I'm using Holbein colors. I may throw in some Carbazole Violet just to darken up some areas, and probably throw in some Hooker's Green, some Phthalo Blue Green shade, and Daniel Smith Ultramarine Turquoise is another one that makes a really good dark. So I'm going to have those kind of on standby. But my first step is to mix up some color. Okay, so leaf green and neutral tint. I also pulled out some Hansa yellow light, and that is a Daniel Smith color. If you don't have these colors, I'll say it again, just use what you have that is similar. If you have a yellow, just use your yellow. You can get sunny green by mixing any, like your sap green or hooker's green with a yellow. So don't stress about it if you don't have these colors. The Hansa yellow light I'm going to use for some of the color in here. And then I also pulled out some lamp black, and that is going to be used for my shade. And we're just going to go for it. So I am going to use my oval wash and just start by getting the paper wet. And I'm not too concerned about touching the edges of those blossoms because we want them to be soft around the edges anyway. But I do want to stay away from that area. See, I think I'm getting my head in there. So let's just kind of float some color in and see where this goes. So I have a little bit more time to work when my paper is wet, rather than trying to paint areas and then having it dry out on me. So I think I've got enough color set out on my palette. Maybe need a little bit more of the darker green. First step though is getting this very light green in. And as I come up into my area back here, I'm going to start getting a little bit of that dark green. And you see this brush is really great because you can come up on the tip of it. Paper's drying out just a bit. Got a paper towel here. I want to come along this edge, however, and just soften that. Give it a little bit of a halo effect. And some of that Hansa just really brightens up some of these areas that sun is hitting. So I want to continue to paint and drop in color, and these are some of the darker hues, the phthalo mixed in with some hookers, mixed in with some burnt orange, just to give me some darker pops of color. So I do want some of it to have soft parts where there's darker shadowed areas. And I'm going to pull in a little bit of cobalt green with the horizon blue. Even a little bit more of the blue down here, maybe. Soften these edges. Make sure you've got enough moisture to keep painting. If it starts drying out, you're going to want to probably stop and let it sit for a little bit. I'm going to go a little bit darker up here while it's still wet. It's going to dry lighter. And we want to remember that. Probably be going back over some of this. I dried my brush off and I'm grabbing some thick leaf green and dropping that in. And I emphasize thick because I've got a lot of moisture on my paper. And so anything that I put down that's too wet that's in my brush is gonna just dilute and spread out. So I want to make sure that I've got a thick consistency paint going into and I'm just letting the brush pretty much give me the texture that I'm looking for, the tip of that brush, and it kind of spread a little bit, which is great because then you've got, let me see if I can do that on purpose. Spread it out a little bit. And then you have more line. I like how that's looking. How about a little bit of backlit where it's more silhouetted? This is drying out. It lost its sheen. I don't need to go back up in there or I'm gonna cause myself some trouble. I think I do want to just do a little tiny bit of spritzing. Maybe not with that. Let's see. A little fine mist water sprayer. See if I can get any. This is a way to keep your paint wet on your paper without going too heavy water droplets. I got an edge there I'm not liking, so I'm going to clean that up. And pull in my round brush number 10 and just kind of work that out. So now we've got a soft edge. And I've lost that line. I don't want a hard line there. That's like not going to work. This is probably going to be underneath a mat down here, so I'm not too worried about it. And while I'm here with this round brush, I can add just a little bit of that Hansa. This has lost its sheen. This is still okay. This is kind of iffy, so I'm gonna play with it a little bit more and then let it dry. And this we're gonna worry about later. It looks pretty hard edged, but I think I can soften that. So let's let this dry and actually, liar, this is a little bit damp. So I think I can play around with it, maybe even up in here. You got to be really careful when you do this because too much water on your brush is going to push into that drying paint and cause blossoms if you're not careful. But if you want them, you can certainly add them like that. It might be kind of nice to have a little spot here and there of an intentional blossom. But if you're not comfortable with that, just let it dry and come back. And as I'm scrubbing out here, I'm also paying very close attention to the water that's on the brush and dabbing off the paint that is coming up. And I can rinse my brush and get it, just kind of push in there. Rinse my brush and get some of that paint off too, so I'm not just shoving paint all over the place. Also keep in mind that we can come back in later with gouache and add some whites in. It's not as bright as a bright white paper, but it can serve to give you some other details or indicators that there's little blooms in there, cute little blooms. Some hard edges are going to be okay because of the backlighting, and this is going to be very light around that sunlit part, so that can be left a fairly hard edge. It actually will help. And I probably ought to stop. And I'm liking how, I don't like the triangle here though, however. That is not something I'm feeling great about, so I think I'll break that up a little bit. It's kind of a big no-no to have a triangle shape in a corner of your paper. So, a little design problem. All right, I like that better. That broke that up a bit. So letting this dry, and we'll come back and work more on it after that. Okay, so this is dry. I'm liking it for the most part. There is this one little area down here that it's supposed to be a blossom. So I'm gonna maybe scrub out some of those harder edges with my Winsor & Newton, just this little acrylic brush. I do have a scrubber. This is it's actually a blender, it's called. I'll try it a little bit, but it tends to lift. If you're not careful, it can kind of make the paper come up. Does that make sense? I'm not sure, but it does do a pretty good job just softening some edges. So I just want to do a little of that so it's pretty wet where I'm working, and I'm just pulling toward the center of this flower blossom and lifting out some of the color. So I'm going to do that in a few different areas here. And like I said earlier, some of this is in the shadow anyway, so it's going to be a little bit darker, but I do want to eliminate hard lines, so that's why I chose to lift some of it out. So just pulling in really gently. I'm not digging into the paper with this. Just gently brushing and pulling toward the center. This is going to be in the light. And you could let that water sit there for a minute too, and let it kind of loosen up the paint before you start working it. And I believe I will be needing to bring in some gouache. But overall, I'm pretty happy with the way this is looking so far. So we'll just keep moving forward on it. And it's important to note that some colors are more staining than others, so they're going to lift easier if they're not a staining color. If it's a staining color, then you guessed it, it stains the paper and makes it harder to lift out. You may be able to lift some of it, but not completely bringing it back to the white of the paper. I like how some of these blossoms can also play off as some of these blossoms in the background. So I like how that turned out. I'm happy I did it. And let's move forward. I think I've got that enough, lifted enough. And referring back to my photo, I'm going to start wanting to think about some negative painting too, as well as painting these blossoms. I think I'll do a little of that first, just to kind of get the feeling of the blossom going. So I'm going to wet this. And we're just going to drop in some of these colors. I'm going to come with a tint. So this is my leaf green, and leaving some white areas. So that was my leaf green with white. And then I've got my neutral tint that can be dropped into some of these areas that are deeper. Again, leaving some light areas. I want some white. Want a little of that Hansa yellow up in here. Make sure to leave a little bit more of an edge there. And I want to get a little bit darker. Have some of that in a deeper shadow. If I'm squinting, this lower half is fairly deep in color in green. I'm going to soak up some of this puddle, leaving a little light edge there. And this has a little bit more gray in it than the green. I'm just going to play some of the petals a little darker, trying not to get too caught up in the detail of this because it is pretty complex. And I think I'm going to drop in a little bit of this titanium white. Just let it spread around. And definitely we'll be coming back over the top of this with some gouache. As I say that, I should not say anything definite because you never know what direction it's going to take. So that's going to stay as is. We're going to come over to this guy and get it wet. Same thing, same idea. I'm going to just start by dropping in some of that leaf green with the white, leaving that top edge. These guys are a little bit lighter down here. I've got my darker value. I'm going to leave some white openings. These even have a little bit of a pinkish orange to them, so I'm going to pull in some Indian yellow, Winsor and Newton. That's more on the yellowish side, and I think I'll put a tiny touch of Opera Rose in that and just kind of play off that, maybe even more Opera Rose. And I dropped in a little bit more water to kind of loosen that and spread it a little so it's not quite so concentrated. Maybe a little up in this guy too. I didn't see it as much up in there, but I think it's nice. Some of that white. And some of these little petals under here are actually kind of dark. I'll come over here to this one. It's not really in my reference photo so much in that other image, but I'm just gonna imagine it being a little bit more in the light, or kind of having some light coming through. Leaving some of those little light edges and light openings helps to give this a little bit more believability. This is up against dry paper, so that's not spreading, and it's fairly thick. I'm going to get some dark, a little darker. Now that this is kind of drying, I can come in with a little bit of a thicker consistency paint and just kind of dot in some areas that might be the center of these flowers. This still has a sheen on it, so it's spreading a little bit further. So I tried to grab a little bit more of a thicker consistency to pop in there. Doing it while it's still wet like this, that way it doesn't stand out too much. It softens and spreads out. All right, I'm gonna let that dry, and we'll come back and take a look at doing some negative painting, I think, next. All right, let's keep going with this. I forgot these little guys here. I feel so bad. I neglected to paint them. So I'm going to use a little bit smaller brush because I've got a smaller area, and just start in the same way. Get a little moisture on the paper, and I'm liking how these are looking a lot. So I'm gonna get a little bit darker in there. Some of my lighter green in there, leaving some edges. Get some little even darker. Like how that made the light areas pop even more. So let's play up on that a little bit. Some of the edges can be lost edges. It's really nice to do. And I haven't pulled in any of the blues, the cobalt green and the horizon blue I haven't pulled in yet, but we'll work on that. I also like how that orange and opera rose played into this. Looks pretty. In fact, I'll bring some of that in here too. Just gives that illusion of light, which I really like that. So, and let's add a couple of little specks. Okay, and moving right along, let's start working on some negative painting. So in doing the negative painting part, we're going to be needing to focus on the negative space. Boop. And so I'm looking at some shapes in here, and that's what I want to try to put into my painting are those negative dark areas. So I'm going to mix up some darker greens with Hooker's green, burnt orange, phthalo blue green shade, ultramarine turquoise probably, some of the black, and maybe I'll pull in some horizon blue and some of the, I did a little bit here with the cobalt green and a little horizon blue, but let's start on the negative shapes first. I'm going to grab a little Hooker's green and mix it with my phthalo blue green shade. That's going to give me a nice dark green. And then naturalizing that a little bit with burnt orange. Then I can add my lamp black to it to darken it up even more. So I'm going to start out just wetting this. I see a nice shape up in here. I'm going to work around that. And I'm going to come right down to the flower. And then I see a nice shape right here. I'm going to work around that. So now I've got a fairly decent area of paper that I've gotten wet. And I'm going to just drop in. I've got a Filbert brush here. I think I'm going to switch it out though. I think that might be the wrong brush. I'm going to go down to this number 8 round. I think that'll work better with this little area. So right along here, I'm just going to soften that edge. Come up in here. I don't want some of these to be quite so hard edged. So I'm just going to drag my brush along the edge of it and soften it a little bit. So I like that. And I'm going to work over this direction with some water and work around again with water on the paper. It makes it a little bit easier because the paper's not drying and you're getting some soft edges. And like I said earlier, I want some of this up in here to be pretty white because that's where the sun is hitting. Let me come in a little bit there. And I'm going to grab some leaf green and just soften that. Let it kind of flow around. I like that little white space in here, so I'm trying not to lose that. There's a branch here, and it is somewhat pink, so pinkish. Just gonna fill that in real quick. And I don't want to lift any of this by putting water into it, so I'm just coming along, and it's just dry paper around it. And I've got some titanium white here. Oops, that's a little too much, a little too strong. I was a little too brave on that one. Lift some of it out. This was a little bit of the horizon blue with leaf green, a kind of interesting mix. And I'll just spread that out a little bit. Just touching in some water to kind of get some blossoms going in here. Okay, so I have lost sight a little bit of what I started out thinking I was going to do with this negative space. So I'm going to have to regather my thinking, because I am starting to just fill in without really thinking about the shapes. So I want to step back for a minute and take a look at it and see what it looks like from a little bit of a distance. Okay, so I'm going to add just a couple of little lines to indicate stems. And I also, when I stepped back, thought that I think another blossom back here would be nice. And that white is going to dry quite a bit lighter, so I'm just going to kind of float it in. And some of these other colors while it's wet. And play around with having a few more. Okay, so let's work on this little area in here. I'm going to go with a bigger brush, actually. This, back to my number 10 Utrecht. And we're going to get this area back here dark, or wet, excuse me. But I want it dark. But I want it loose. So let's see what happens. I'm going to go right over that green too, because I don't want the hard edges to pop up. And grabbing from some of these puddles over here, just going to let that float around. I'm going to get some sap green, which is a little bit more natural of a green. And varying up these greens is really super important for making it believable. You don't want to just have one green. You can even add some other elements, like I just did there, was that mixture of cobalt. No, it was horizon blue and leaf green. So just play with varying up the colors so you don't get stuck with a really boring mix of greens. I like how that started floating around in there. That was pretty cool. I'm being a little bit careful here because I feel like that color underneath can be easily disturbed. So let's leave that and see what happens. That looks pretty fun. I see a little dark shape here. Let's get that filled in. A little bit of leaf green on my brush to come along and soften that edge with. And let's do that leaf green with our neutral tint and help that flower to pop out a little bit. I like the light down here. I need to see if I want it to stay or do I want it to go. I like the green here. I think I want this a little bit darker. And I'm going to step back again. Okay, we need to darken up some of the blossoms here, I'm thinking. So I'm going to come in with some, actually more on the gray side. Let's go with that. And just kind of float it in here and there. I even like the idea of doing some more leaning toward kind of a purple, very grayed down purple. This one looks like it's hanging to me, so I'm kind of trying to go off of that feeling. Like the light's coming in a little bit more there. I have to keep reminding myself to not get too hung up in the detail. It's really tricky on a subject like this because there's so, you want to copy the picture, but if you do that, you lose the essence, I guess you could say. Don't want to lose the essence of this, but you still want to have a believable painting. So I'm trying to keep it from getting too complex. Just get some loose squiggly areas of deeper shadowed areas in this blossom. And I also want to add some loose stems in here. So getting it a little bit wet and coming in with a little darker stem color. I'm going to add whatever this brown is over that I have on my palette. I don't know what it is, so I'm just going to go with it. Add a little black to it because it's kind of red. And then I'm just adding a little bit of Hansa yellow and leaf green to kind of enhance that a little bit. Soften that edge a little bit. I'm using the side of my brush to indicate some foliage back there. Just got it wet. And I put a little sap green in with my Horizon Blue. I don't know if this is going to work, but I liked that streak of light. It's just paper towel and swiping it off. And come back and lose that little spot. Okay, I do believe it is close enough to a finishing point. And I do want to add some gouache. I want to go in with some white gouache and just add some extra little petals in those flowers. Okay, so I'm going to use this number 6 Heritage brush. And I've got some white gouache on my palette, and I can mix that with some of my other colors that I still have on my board. So I've got that leaf green. I'm going to just put a small amount of that in and just do some little extra petals. Don't have to do too many, just a couple. Not all the same size. They all can be a little bit different. This doesn't stand out quite as much because it's got the lighter background. So let's come in here a little bit more. And last but not least, I'm going to just get some of my burnt umber, mix it up with some ultramarine blue deep, and that's going to be for some dark it's the shadow side of the branch there. Add a little bit of coral right next to that. A lot of these branches are green on these bushes, but there's some pink ones in there too. These are just fun little finishing touches. Let's get a thick, there's some green branches back in here. And a little bit of that gouache can go in the background too, or on these branches too, and pop them out. Okay, I think this is done. I'm going to take another step back before I call it good and analyze, and then we'll work on it some more or call it finished. All right, I took a step back, and like I've said before, that is always a good thing to do. I really do like it, and I like the feeling of it. Even the unfinished look of the background is kind of cool. But I do feel like some of the deeper darks, and I think I'll even go with the smaller brush. I'm going to go down to my number 4. Need even a little deeper dark in like behind some of these. So I'm going to get up a mix of dark green, cooler. So I'm adding a bit of phthalo to that and getting it deep in a cooler deep green. And I'll add a little bit of black to even the dark green that I have already. So I'm also gonna just, because I want a soft edge in here, I'm going with a little bit of water first and touching in. I'm going to add some white actually to that mixture to get it a bit more grayed down. Horizon blue, cobalt green, and leaf green. Let's see what that does with a little touch of that dark mixture. What this is doing is popping some of those whites out even further. And I'm just softening that just a little bit. I don't want too many hard edges in there. Just a nice, a little more shadow. So just a few finishing touches with some of that gouache mixed with leaf green. Don't need a whole lot, just a couple of lines here and there. All right, so overall, I feel good about this. I like the feeling that comes across, and like most of the time, if I take a step back and look at it some more, I may add some more detail to it. But I like the feeling. I like the brightness. I like the snowball blossoms. They stand out, and that was what I set out to accomplish. So overall, I am happy with it. So hope you guys learned something from this video, and go out and find what you love to paint, and even if it seems daunting and challenging, do it anyway. You learn from the process. So happy painting, you guys. We'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button and like this video, and also turn on the notifications. That way you'll know when I have something new up. Anyway, have a great day. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.